Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of Nutanix Weekly. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got Harvey Green, who's coming off vacation, as well as am I. Hopefully, Harvey, you didn't sleep at an airport last night. I did. I slept in the Austin, Texas airport last night, and it was cold as hell in that airport.
I guess that sounds like a terrible idea.
I was wondering where Andy slept last night, but thanks for volunteering that.
No, well, I had two of my kids with me, and that's Jirah Cox, who's also with us. Jirah is a guest host, or not a guest host. He's a co-host. See, I'm a little rusty. Hey, Jirah, how's it going?
Hey, man.
No more vacations for you.
So it was freezing, and finally, I don't know if you can call it engineer mind or whatever kicked in. There was an upstairs section. I was like, well, I wonder if we go upstairs, it'll be warmer. And sure enough, it was warmer. So we got an hour and a half of decent sleep on the floor in a hallway upstairs in the airport. That sounds horrible, doesn't
it? It does sound challenging.
For sure, yeah.
It did give me a chance to listen to a few podcasts as well as catching up on a movie I wanted to see. So Harvey, how was your vacation?
It was good. I did not sleep on the floor.
You travel like normal people in your family?
Yeah, we try to, and try to make it so that everybody else can travel like normal people too, and we don't disturb them.
Yeah. So Jirah, I thought about you. We went out to a couple national parks in southern Utah. We went to Arches, which is amazing. We went to Bryce Canyon, and we went to Zion. I don't know if you've been to any of those, but a lot of people camping and hiking. I know you like to do that stuff. If you haven't been there, you definitely got to go.
No, they're all on my list for sure. That sounds fantastic.
I saw tent camping. I saw glamping and $1 million motorhomes. I saw this crazy thing where they've got these tents that go up on top of your vehicle now. Nest, I think they're called. That looked like that'd be a lot of fun.
For sure. Yeah, we have a minivan that we could take camping, so that one's out of the picture for us. Can't sleep on top of that, but we can fit a pretty big tent and a lot of air mattresses inside the minivan. So that's our style for now.
I think all you need is a roof rack. I think this thing it's like a tent that goes on top of a roof rack.
Oh, sorry. I guess I wasn't communicating the appetite for a roof rack on our minivan accurately.
Yeah.
You're right. I acknowledge that is the requirement. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, sure. and we last time we went, we saw a lot of pop-ups, and the kids were like, "Hey, those look easier and more comfortable." So we might be a pop-up in our future.
No, that'd be awesome. That's some good family bonding there.
Yeah, probably equal amount of setup, but just a comfier sleep at night,
as well as some time in the bathhouse and all that other fun stuff that goes along with that type of camping. It was about 106 degrees, which honestly wasn't unbearable hot. But it's cool at night. Cool off.
There goes that. It was a dry heat conversation.
Mm-hmm. It was definitely a drier heat. There was plenty of sweating that went on. Lots of water was consumed. Well, you guys were chit-chatting about some Disney streaming before we hit the record button. What show is that I have no clue of that I'm supposed to know about?
The newest Marvel movie, Black Widow, came out. It's the newest. It's the biggest COVID era movie release ever, and it made $60 million opening weekend just from streaming.
60 million. So you have? Is it on Disney or somewhere else?
That one's on Disney. Yeah.
So you pay extra for that?
Yeah.
movie?
So you pay for whatever your Disney subscription is, and then this one was $30 that you could opt in to get unlimited viewings of. You're basically buying it, I guess, early.
Mm-hmm.
So not bad. Beats the cost of old school movie theater and snacks.
How do we tie that into our world? That conversation around, okay, you get the basic service, and then you get pops of money or pops of additional content for one-time fees. Does that apply in our world, or is it that we just pay for packages A, B, or C, and when you need to go and get the extra thing, you got to upgrade to a certain package? I mean, that world very much aligns with the SaaS world that we live in, and we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, feature-rich base offering with if you need additional functionality, of course, it's there for you when you need it.
Mhm. Well, so the blog for today is Nutanix Xi Leap, DR as a service, standing the test of time. Believe it or not, Nutanix Xi Leap, DR as a service, just got easier. And this is a blog by Ed Collins and Joyce John. Well, maybe it comes up in this conversation how Nutanix as a DR service, how you pay for it. So maybe let's go through the blog and then bring it back to this movie conversation and see if there's how this becomes a business conversation, just like in our own household. There's a lot of as a service things happening now that at the end of the day you need to look at it as a business conversation as it meets the family budget, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just a way of nickeling and diming us to death.
Well, or maybe if we can offer some advice to other people watching their tech podcasts, it could help to plan out segues maybe before the show. I was going to ask you, Andy, as you're out there sweating in 106 degrees, how many DR tests did you do for your corporate environment?
Well, I didn't do any DR tests, but I will tell you that I logged into my virtual app and desktop world multiple times along the way during the trip. I did it from the hotel kiosk, which I used to do that for fun. Now I do it for real because I have to get work done somewhere along the way. So I don't know that I did any DR testing, but I, as always, did business continuity testing.
Availability monitoring.
Yeah. I mean, I had work to get done, and I had a little travel device I took with me, and I had offer letters that I had to tweak, and when I had to go get something done that was bigger than just an email or two, I went over to the hotel kiosk and I lived it. I lived what it is we tell people they need to have. So business continuity, I definitely did. DR, I did not do.
So would it have been helpful to you if your DR could have been self-testing your capabilities as you were out there camping, hiking, sweating, emailing, offer lettering?
Well, let's talk about XenTegra specifically, because we may have a false norm, or maybe it's not. We have everything so distributed with backups that I tell people all the time that we don't actually have a DR plan. We have redundancy across a spectrum of data centers, including the cloud, and we have backups just in case we need them. I think in this conversation, this is going to be more for the people who really do need to have a true DR, either for peace of mind or they can't have a distributed model. What's your thoughts on someone like me saying that I don't have a DR because I have a distributed model that's super highly available from multiple locations with some backups?
No, I love that. Right? It's a great model. I think it's real to say, like Netflix probably does not have traditional backups, right, of all of its streaming content. But like you, right, it's the data that matters is so redundantly spread across failure domains that they become resilient against traditional IT failure in that scenario, right? I'm guessing, I don't know, Andy, I asked this totally ignorantly. We'll find out live here on the podcast. Are you guys multi-cloud, or is that all redundancy within one cloud, or tell me a little bit more?
Well, yeah, we're definitely clouds, because as Harvey's used to me saying, there's no such thing as a cloud, it's clouds. Sure. And you really need to be cloud. So we have things running in Microsoft Azure. We have things running in software as a service, whether it's Office or other places, Citrix ShareFile, for example. We have one of my favorites, which is Podio, which is as a service SaaS. We have our own private data centers. I say private data centers, they're in colos, but there's Integra owned hardware, all running Nutanix. And then those are replicated across multiple data centers. So we have private, we have semi-private, we have SaaS, and we have public IaaS. So we are definitely a great example of clouds, and more clouds.
No, you're totally multi-cloud, hybrid cloud all day, every day. And more importantly, you've thought through, it sounds like, done the creative tabletop planning of like what could take out this service or this function that runs my business. And that's honestly the most critical part of any kind of DR planning is the tabletop exercise of like, what kind of failure do we want to plan to survive? Because as I said before, it's that failure of imagination that really blows up a lot of best laid DR plans.
Well, I would say in most cases, we just made it somebody else's problems.
That's fair. I mean, that gets into a whole other conversation around like, vendor vetting and SLAs and the black box of as a service versus something more transparent about what's their availability model. So it's probably a whole other excellent conversation to have.
But also keep in mind, we're a 9-year-old business that grew up this way. We don't have legacy anything to have to deal with, really. And I think what we're talking about for what we're doing is a small to medium business concept. It's a newer business that didn't have to have legacy data centers. Like, we've never had our own physical brick and mortar data center because we're just not that old. Everything was colo at the most when we got started. But I think what we're going to talk about here is the fact that some people have that legacy. I won't call it baggage, because it's not. I mean, it is what it is. And what we're going to talk about here is how Nutanix can enable that DR, which some people truly do need to have a DR, whether it's for compliance or for keeping the lights on reasons. And so let's talk through what they're covering here in the blog as to how Nutanix Xi, has enabled people to have a true DR as a service without having that old model of 2 physical data centers, one for production, one for backup, or worst case that I ever lived through was having SunGuard, where I showed up down there and had about 1/5 of the compute capacity that I needed to bring my environment back up.
Yeah, I mean, the causes for certainly needing a DR plan are numerous. I mean, I've heard about water mains breaking, cars crashing into transformers, whatever makes you need it, right? Like, so Xi Leap, which is our DR as a service offering, just exists to let you have your stuff, the stuff that makes up your enterprise software stack for your business, replicated somewhere else and available to use. It's actually not even a really new offering. We've had it for several years. But so this blog post highlights some recent enhancements delivered to the service. And what I was trying to fish out of you unsuccessfully, right? As you were sweating and hiking and camping and all that good stuff, you could have, if your business ran traditional on-prem apps that were less sassy, if you will, you could have had automated DR testing occurring in the background. I like this phrase that we've coined here in this blog post: 0-click DR testing. So as you're sending your data, your VMs to Xi Leap for DR, with this new ability, lets it auto do DR testing for you, right? Power those VMs on, send you the report of, hey, I was able to recover everything you sent me. It took X amount of time to power on, or whatever the content of that report is. And then have that occur at regular intervals. So now the benefit there is, right, kind of like we would coach all of our customers, the benefit of your DR recovery is tied to your DR testing, right? Like, the more frequently you can test within reason, more benefits you gain, right? At a certain point, if you did like a daily test, possibly that might be diminishing returns, but that's a good problem to have if you can even get close to that, right? Let's get out of the annual or even less than annual testing that we might occasionally find among our customer base, right? So the more I can automate that testing and less time, but without linearly increasing the human time, right? If I can test twice as often without doubling the workload on my team, that's a win, right? If I can test 4 times more often without quadrupling their workload, that's a win. So that ability to say, my DR as a service offering will now auto test my replication, I think that's crazy cool.
So wait, you want me to have DR and test it too?
I'm sorry, Harvey, you're the customer here, right? So yeah, so testing is this thing we want you to do with the data you replicate. A fun role play. So I mean, which drives on the whole point, right? Is that testing is frequently it can often be a pain. It is often neglected. It is never as often as either we the vendor, y'all the consultant, or even the customer or their line of business owner would probably prefer, right? But it also, old school DR testing is painful and costs time, right? So if we can decouple those things and test more often without burdening the team, that's a win.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point too, I'm kind of talking tongue in cheek a little bit, but I mean, from my thinking, you don't really have DR until it's tested.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, that's super true.
And Harvey, when you say tested, do you mean fully moved into production, or just set over to the side and tires kicked?
I mean, testing to the point that you know that if production goes down today, you know that you have DR that will work tomorrow. Down to the users being able to actually complete tasks like they do every day.
Now, a successful replication job shouldn't give you the confidence to go to your boss and say we're covered.
No,
the DR test is what really should give you that confidence.
Right, because you can have all the data over there, but if nothing works, that's not DR. That's a backup.
Now, in your corporate experiences, what was the furthest extent you took DR? Like I worked for a company once that we failed over and then we brought everybody in on a Saturday to test, but we never actually worked in live production environments. Or did you guys actually work in live production failed over DR testing environments?
That's a great question. I would love to say that it was tested all the way through what we're talking about and having the users perform transaction. And in very few cases, that was actually done. But it's funny, I guess, because companies will put more resources from that particular perspective into actually testing the apps and things that they develop internally, rather than, what will actually make for production in the event of a failure. And I just think that's kind of interesting that you would go through all of that for one versus the other, when one is the only way you can make money and the other is the way that you can enhance and make future money and better, faster money. So, you kind of you want to make sure you have your bases covered first, but that's not always how it happens.
So where does this, and you guys may know this answer, I don't, where does this show up on like a Sarbanes-Oxley type of audit?
I'll take a guess. It's not, that kind of auditing is not my day-to-day, but last tested date, right? Frequency of prescribed tests, or when was your last successful test, right? Both are probably, I would think, key metrics on that kind of an audit.
Yeah. And then I wonder is there an asterisk beside it that says live production transactions, or just it came up and everybody saw blinking lights and celebrated?
Yeah, that one I don't know. And I think, probably the industry itself would be perhaps better served by having a tighter definition of what is a DR test, or how do we define a successful DR test?
Right.
To Harvey's point, right? Like, let's, get away from the line of backups and get to a running environment. So yeah, that's a great point. So
here's the high level bullets that says, okay, here are a few of the ways that Xyleap DR as a service will continue to wow its customers in 2021. Automated testing, that's the 0-click, where I guess, Jirah, what that's really saying is you just kind of you schedule it for whatever frequency you want, and it does it and sends you a report.
Yep.
Oh, I did want to say a while ago that part of the XenTegra model comes because we look at desktop as a service as one of our primary workloads. And when you do desktop as a service, it teaches you to do a distributed IT model that kind of blends towards everything else that is doable in such a manner as the desktops are. So that's why we have another leg up on doing this. Is it's the way we do things at XenTegra, is because desktop as a service almost always runs out of multiple data centers, and it obfuscated to the user as to where it's coming from. We kind of dictate and control where it comes from.
Yeah, that was actually a point that I didn't get to while you and Jirah were going through that. When you started and you were answering his questions, you kind of said that you really didn't have DR because you had this distributed model. And I was kind of thinking from the other side of that, your distributed model is also your DR, because, basically your disaster recovery is recovering from a disaster, right? One data center blows up and you can run in another one. You just recovered from a disaster. So that kind of qualifies, if you ask me.
It does. It's more impactful to say I don't need no stinking DR plan.
Right.
But it really is a DR plan. Almost the perfect DR plan for someone geographically as dispersed as we are here in the US and Canada. But in the future, we're going to be multiple countries on different continents, and that's going to become even more interesting. Jirah, in the scenario where you have my ultimate goal, so let's say you have a distributed model. Okay, fine. What if you had a model where you had a production and then you had like Xi Leap for your DR as a service? Could you do what I would really love customers to do, which is to fail over for a week or so and then fail back the next week? Is it built for that type of vetting of the DR?
Yeah, 100%. It's absolutely built to let you fail over, run in a performant fashion, run live workloads, keep users, keep the business online and happy and run. And then fail back to on-prem if you want to, fail back to wherever it replicated from. Or if you need workloads that run there 24/7, you can also do that as well. So you can have some VMs on-prem, some VMs that run in Xi Leap. All that's configurable. Have
you had customers that failed over once and then maybe failed over again later, and then finally the third time they failed over and they never brought it back?
It's a very valid use case for sure. Yeah, I mean, either that or what I always envisioned as sort of the brass ring, right? The gold standard of like DR testing is one site quits being production and one site quits being DR, and it's simply just availability zone A and B. And if the application can't stretch across both of them, I'll at least move it periodically, maybe every month, right? So that my failover gets as automated, as quick, and as low drama as possible, right? And I don't have a dedicated production budget line item and a DR budget line item. It's simply multiple availability zones that I offer up to the business for use.
Yeah, that was getting exactly to the point that I was going to bring up next, is if you still have what you refer to as primary and secondary, or primary and DR, then you should be examining.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of vet yourself. If you still have primary and secondary, you haven't gotten to where you need to go yet. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just, you may have legacy applications that are client server apps, and latency is a big issue, or maybe it's even web-based apps, but the server side of the application equation is what's holding you back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you asked the question, Andy, about like, does your DR test involve running at the secondary site and with live IO? And if it doesn't, it's interesting to at least catalog what are the constraints there that keep you from wanting to do that, right? Is it often going to be probably network latency or adjacency or speed related, right? Compared to, hey, it's 2021. We've spent the last year and a half as a globe on like video calls, right? Like bandwidth is sort of a more of a commodity offering than ever, right? Bandwidth is getting better and better in the entire developed world. Speed's increasing. It's time to reevaluate business tolerance for, do I need to have a primary Active Directory site, or can I have multiple, right? Can I have, let's rethink, DNS and so forth, and have that availability get broader.
Mm-hmm. And IPv6 too, right? I mean, that's a game changer in some of this. All right, so the three bullets that we haven't managed to get through here: automated testing, layer 2 stretching. Which, Jirah, is there a paragraph or two that goes into each of these in more detail? I think there is.
Right? Yeah, it's an enhancement to the networking, right? The VPN that can connect your on-prem data center to Xi Leap. That allows you to fail over just part of a subnet, right? So in the past, again, on the topic of like friction and what keeps you from wanting to do a DR failover, right? What's the painful part of that? It can be, hey, if I have to move the entire subnet from this switch to that switch, well, then that's going to be friction, keep me from wanting to do it on the same kind of granularity that I might want to get closer to, like, say, a SaaS application operating model. And so now with this enhancement, now you can do a partial subnet failover, which lets you do better IP address, MAC address preservation, and when you do that failover, so drastically reduces the pain felt there with the layer 2 stretching.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the biggest obstacles in the whole thing is networking on each side of the fence, and how you either re-IP everything or you keep it from stepping on each other's toes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then finally, the third bullet here, the RPO sizer, so recovery point objective sizer, not to be confused with recovery time objective. Did I get both those right?
You did.
And having, and I meet with people all the time, and I ask them what their RPO is and their RTO is, and they look at me and say, well, what should it be? And I look back at them and say, well, what should it be? It's your answer, not mine. And honestly, it's the executives that need to have the answer to that question. And if you're a mid-level IT person or even a CIO, you need to put that answer on somebody else, because IT shouldn't be telling the business what RPO and RTO should be.
Yeah, you're totally right, because that, so many places I'm sure we've all been, where the answer is basically just like, what do I think would get me yelled at more versus less, right? If I had to give that answer back during an outage to my boss, when in reality, the value of that exercise is that defines criticality, right? That defines investment in any kind of DR tech, whatever you pick for your availability model. If I know that my application downtime or business downtime costs me X per hour, now that tells me what the DR strategy is worth, right? What level of availability do I need to model back to the business and attach that value to?
You're exactly right. I mean, this is literally defining time, right? And in defining time, you're defining money. And executives don't want to necessarily concentrate on time, but they definitely want to hear about money.
Yeah.
But doesn't the doing it as a service make the cost versus the other? Let's say my recovery time objective is an hour versus a week. Doesn't as a service enable me to kind of get those closer to the same cost?
Potentially, sure. Perhaps if you're let's say your application tolerated a week of downtime or a week of data loss, right? If your RPO was 1 week, right? So like it could be Friday and you roll back to Monday. That's probably inherently lower value data to the business, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
Or if it could be in need of an application rewrite to say, like, can we achieve better replication than something like infrastructure powered replication, right? If it's that low churn, is there an opportunity to use in-guest, like SQL based or file based replication that would even help us out with the RPO there? I don't know, just a thought, right? This is all under the context, all under the umbrella of infrastructure-based DR planning, right? Arguably, Andy, that's the opposite of what you primarily described you do for your business, is you do application level planning and you do very little reliance upon infrastructure lighting services back up in other availability zones, right? Which is totally valid, right? Both apply. One's more for old school applications. One's more dependent upon like next gen or SaaS based or web based delivery of applications.
Yeah, ultimately that exactly in pretty roundabout way defines exactly what Andy was talking to, which is the business needs to make that decision rather than IT being the people to come up with that, right?
Yeah, true. Fundamentally, this enhancement is just, it's helping you. What we want to avoid is the business giving you those requirements, but then not knowing if we're actually matching or meeting RPO, RTO objectives. And so this tool, the Zyleap RPO Sizer tool, lets your Prism Central on-prem watch your VM change rate and then map that back to an applicable RPO. So that, can this VM match a 1 hour RPO? Can it match a 4 hour RPO from whatever the current location is up to the availability zone in the cloud?
Which is also great, because that was the next point that I was going to get to, is normally you go and talk to the business about it and say, well, I want everything all the time. Well, everything all the time comes at a cost. Some of that cost is money, and some of that cost is actually what you can technically do.
Yeah. So some of it you pay for with money, some of it you pay for with time or tiers or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, this tool will help with actually helping you determine what you can actually do. Electrons only work so fast.
Yeah. When Andy launches, Europe or Africa or Asia operations, replicating an entire VM from there versus like North Carolina to, Ashburn will cost something different or offer something different as an availability model. Right. So
you're saying the speed of light can only go the speed of light?
We're working on those laws of physics, but they are so far inviolable.
Right.
Well, and we have, and maybe you talk about it here, but the bandwidth, right? I mean, that's a big, you pay for how much you can replicate.
Right.
And there's a cost associated with that. Now, is that part of the solution, or that's, bring your own bandwidth?
It's definitely bring your own bandwidth. Depending on the data center you want to choose your availability zone, there probably also are direct connect offerings available as well.
Mhm.
So again, as I guess it's a more expensive version of bring your own bandwidth.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered some of these things, but let's hit them for sure. Why is the frequent DR test important? We've covered it, but let's.
Yeah, I mean, I think it. I think it's key because you want to support. We all have to be in the business of supporting faster change rates of our applications, right? We live in a world now where like these notifications come out to patch systems, patch servers now, right? There is no wait for patch Tuesday. It is this exploit is live in the wild right now. Patch ASAP. Drop what you're doing. And so as we have to support more agile application management, right? Patching more frequently, changing things more frequently. That's all in the context of just software, like COTS software, right, that someone buys and you run. If you're writing it, if it's in-house software developed, you need that agility, that tolerance for greater change frequency, even more so, right? How we do more pushes into production per day, not fewer. Insert all of the Phoenix project here. So how do we support the business that way? And as the applications are changing more frequently, it would become more important to therefore have more frequent DR testing as well, right? Because the faster your application changes, the faster it will stale or invalidate your last DR test.
And that brings us to the next topic, which is that change is constant, and getting faster and faster and faster. And we're just along for the ride. We just got to figure out how we're going to hang on and be there when the team turns to us for the answer.
Yeah, if your application change rate, 10x's, do you have the bandwidth to support that kind of change rate increase, for your application as well? So good to have. They're not linked, but they are related, right? Good to have those both mapped out and understood and monitored.
And Jirah, does this work if we're talking about database VMs with active databases in them, where are we replicating the entire VM every so often, snapshot and send it up, or are we actually pulling out databases from those VMs and then doing potentially both?
So Nutanix, of course, we operate at the infrastructure level, right? Sending VM disks from point A to point B. Of course, we can definitely send the diffs, right? Once they've been seeded, we can send just the changes for sure. But in general, right, my approach is always like, let's solve problems at the infrastructure level as a last resort, right? In guest, database replication is better than sending an entire VM, right? Sending the VM is better than restoring from backup, right? So there's always like a hierarchy, but in guest replication, native replication, right? Whatever, doing a SQL AAG, doing Oracle Data Guard, it's certainly better than when there's cost tolerance for that, is better than doing it at the infrastructure level, right? Or doing like a subnet failover versus requiring versus engineering for like DNS discovery or VM re-IPing, right? So on the hierarchy of preferences, right, it's better to do it in guest at the application level, but infrastructure is always the sort of the catch-all, right? We can always fall down to that level and do it there.
Is there a point in time when the change rate is slow enough, even for database type solutions, that you go ahead and do it at the infrastructure level just to make sure you have it that way?
Change rate, sure. Or I would probably get there faster via complexity, right? If it's just a simple, admin database logging, something like that, sure, right? Just snapshot it once an hour, send it across. There's tolerance for perhaps data loss. There's tolerance for, remember, like most DR recovery models mean I power on the VM, OS has to start, application has to start. That takes a few minutes, right? But if it's a low criticality workload, that's no problem at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes sense. Harvey, any comments on this section?
No, I mean, I think we're definitely hitting it there. It's the same as what we've been talking about, so I won't repeat it. Go ahead.
Well, and my fear is we are repeating some things, but I think there's still value and context to be relayed. So Jirah mentioned this a while ago, the ability in this 2021 version of the solution just to do a partial subnet as part of your test. Any magic that we should highlight beyond what we've talked about thus far?
Yeah, I think just the key takeaway, right, is that ability to use it to reduce the friction of doing a failover, right? When you add complexity to your DR solution, you say, well, if I fail over this app, that drags in this subnet because I can't do a re-IP, and then that subnet has other collateral damage that I have to bring across. Then that is going to make you less hesitant to authorize a DR failover, right, as a business owner. And so when we make that a simpler, easier decision that has less, collateral damage, less fallout from activating a certain portion of DR recovery, that's better, right? Always having more granularity. More granularity beats less granularity. I think probably every time I would take that bet. I can't think of any exceptions to that rule.
And this allows different.
What is more granularity
groups?
Worse? I can't think of any examples.
Well, it's probably as long as if it brings complexity with it or time, effort. Maybe.
Yeah, that's fair.
But in this case, this would give different application groups, assuming that they've subnetted themselves off, the ability to go do their own DR test as needed.
Yep.
Yeah. So layer 2 stretch, right? It's it applies different trade-offs to the outcome, right? So some packets, like maybe perhaps a broadcast or whatnot, might have to get stretched across the network unnecessarily, but the benefit that they bring, right? What's the trade-off? Is that VM can then light up without having to re-IP or stay just as discoverable on the network, or I don't have to make DNS changes to my maybe perhaps client server applications.
Yeah, to Jirah's point, this definitely helps reduce the friction because, normally you've got multiple groups that are using or consuming a specific subnet. And if you have to get all of those groups, say it's 5 groups, 10 groups of people to consent to DR testing, is going to be considerably harder to do that or it will not happen. So by being able to split off what you need, that will help just make that happen for you without having to involve everyone else.
Right. So next section talks about keeping it simple, which is always a plus. Is this still as it relates to the stretch subnetting?
Right. Yeah. So that paragraph's talking about the simplicity really of not having to do complicated subnet calculations around fail over this subnet and that impacts these other applications. The simplicity there comes from the, again, granularity of having smaller effects, right? So we can just bring over this VM and stretch the layer 2 connections back to the primary subnet.
Yeah, and normally just saying that is definitely an oversimplification, but again, with what they have built already into Xyleap, you actually have a button labeled extend where you can extend that subnet across, which is, a much simpler way to do it than what the network team would have to do on a normal basis.
So we probably should have started by just talking about what Xi itself is. And Xi is the ability to run Nutanix on Nutanix natively in the cloud, right?
Yeah, so Xyleap, so for the context of this article, Xyleap's our DR as a service offering, right? Mm-hmm. So helping you achieve, if you don't have an availability zone, right? That's ultimately what this is about. A disaster recovery target, a place to replicate your data, and then recover your VMs and applications and get back online. It's an easy native way, nothing to install on the Nutanix cluster you already have, to quickly and easily turn that up. And then, of course, it has a cost benefit to say you're not having to obtain like a full cabinet in a colo data center or build out your own cage or whatever. You simply can rent all of that as a service from Nutanix on demand.
Does the concept of Xi infrastructure as a service, does that exist anymore, or is that all the cluster things these days?
I actually am not being coy when I say I probably would defer to somebody in marketing more about that, about how we're applying the Xi branding to different services. And honestly, we're running up here to .next in a month or two, so probably watch this space for that. I actually don't. I'm not teasing that I know more than I do. I genuinely, would just defer to somebody else on that one.
So Jirah's ducking the question. I see.
Oh yeah, hardcore. Yeah. Pretty slippery, but yeah. So Xyleap specifically, that one's DR as a service.
Yeah, no, it's good. That's I mean, it makes sense to to tie to some of those other cloud infrastructures and ride their wave, but bring the Nutanix magic to it. And that's my words, not Jirah's. So just let the record state.
Oh, we'll claim magic. That's fine. Yeah.
And so, the last section really talks about the RPO sizer, which, is there anything about this that we haven't covered beyond the need to know that you can predict and take the guesswork out of sizing the RPO, the recovery point objective, not the run pass option?
No, I like that we've used the word sizer in there, right? Sizer, if you've not used it, right, it's candidly, it was a large part of why I came to Nutanix. Even as a partner, it's the pre-sales tool that really helps get our arms around, your VM requirements, your workloads, and then put together a solution that matches those requirements. It's a fantastic tool. So I think using sizer here is really, I love that a lot. It's a different kind of sizer. This one's getting arms around change rates and network throughput, right? Comparing, well, the VM changes this often, but your connectivity to Xi Leap is favorable or not favorable, or you got jitter or bad weather on the internet, whatever's happening that day, saying can our connectivity to the DR recovery environment, Xi Leap, does that jive well with what we're watching the VM change rate do, right? And so that there's reducing surprises on, are those compatible or not.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like that day when that big budget film comes out and everybody's streaming. I'm trying to tie it back to our original conversation.
Yeah. I completely forgot
down.
the framing device. Sorry, it's on me.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered it. Now let's take this conversation into a business conversation real quick. In terms of cost, is it like Disney, where all of a sudden they're charging me every month, and when I want to see something really special, they're going to charge me extra for that one special thing? Or is it like an all-inclusive type of offering that Xi Leap is based around?
So it probably depends on what you want, right? So Xi Leap, you can get DR as a service, right? With testing built in and accommodated. I think last I checked, you could do like 2 full tests a year, like for like a 1 week failover or 1 week environment turn up included. Check the latest. Check with your Nutanix account team there for the latest, but that was my memory of every 6 month full DR test accommodated in the base offering. But then, like when I want to go watch, Black Widow, right, as a above and beyond offering, you can also, get quotes there for also live VMs running in Xi Leap full time. So if I want, 100 VMs replicated and just available for DR, but I want 10 more VMs that run full time, and maybe they do my in-guest application level replication, that's something that can be tailored as well, depending on what your needs are.
Yes, as a service, lots of things are possible that we were kind of landlocked into before.
Right.
That's the beautiful thing about it, and that's the beautiful thing about a company like mine or XenTegra growing up in an age where things could be consumed as a service, if not day one, on day 3.
Yeah, we're all about freedom and choice. So yeah,
that's awesome. Well, guys, I appreciate you joining me on a Monday. Sorry, I'm a little slow today, but I'll be back to normal next week. Anything on the Nutanix?
We know for a fact you didn't sleep at Holiday Inn Express last night, so that's excusable.
There was a point in time last night I would have paid to go to Holiday Inn Express.
Well played.
Jirah, on the Nutanix side, you mentioned .next, I think, is coming up. Anything else on that?
Go register. It's online again this year. It's free. Everybody can attend. September 20th through the 23rd. Nutanix.com/next.
Any rumors on next year? I'm dying to get back out there and get customers to these events.
I've not heard. All the announcements so far are focusing on this year, but I'm right there with you.
I think it's going to take one company announcing that they're going to do it in person for customers next year, and then everybody will follow suit. At least I hope so.
I think there's probably some nuance as well. Like we're very lucky that the U.S. is, has broad vaccine availability and is at the cutting edge of reopening, right? But I think we only run, I can't remember if we run 2 or 3 .next in person. I can't remember if we have, I know we have EMEA. I don't think Asia has a dedicated one just yet. So then that broadens a lot of considerations right there to like globally, what's the recovery rate looking like?
Right.
You do at least have HIMSS going on, the healthcare summit going on next month. So if the healthcare people are okay with coming back together,
there you go.
We're either all good or all screwed.
I'll just say follow the money, and that's where you'll find decisions being made.
Right.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate it. I've got one more podcast to do today, and then I'm done. Then I'm gonna take the rest of the day off.
Sounds
on a day's work.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks. Appreciate the time.
Yep. Thank you.
Talk to y'all.